2025 was about shedding, letting go of what no longer fit. 2026 is about movement, speed, freedom, and bold decisions. And that's what's next on the Leading with Instinct podcast.
This is the Leading with Instinct podcast, focusing on intuitive leadership and fostering deep team connections through equine experiential leadership development and coaching. Brought to you by KatieTheCoach.com and the Collaboration Partners. Now, here's your hosts, Katie Navarra-Bradley and Ginny Telego.
Welcome back to Leading with Instinct, where we explore how we can lead with more authenticity, clarity, and connection, and what horses can teach us about the way we show up as leaders. Hi, Ginny. How are you?
Hi, Katie. I'm doing well, thank you. How are you doing?
We're doing well. It's been a winter up here in upstate New York. Lots of sub-zero temperatures and snow. I know it's a lot less mild out in Colorado.
Well, you know, the weather, the temperatures have been mild. We've had lots of sunshine. Not really any snow. We had a couple inches of snow 2 weekends ago, but other than that, we've not had much. So I would love for you to ship some of the snow to us. That would be great because we could certainly use the moisture, and I know the ski resorts would really like to have some more snow. So it's too bad we can't come up with a way to share that.
For sure. You know, I think one thing that might be of interest to our readers, to our listeners, because I get this question all of the time is, what about the horses out in this cold weather? And, you know, horses are really built for this weather. Their coat is naturally designed to fluff so that it keeps the moisture away from their skin. And sometimes we like to micromanage them. And a great example of that was during our big snowstorm, I actually put blankets on our horses for the first time. They have a free access shed that was full of hay. And when I went to bring them in that night, they were all covered with ice cubes and icicles because they wanted to be outside. So people are always really fascinated to learn that we feel the cold a lot more than the horses, and they actually kind of dig this weather.
Yeah, that's so funny because that is exactly what happened here when we had some winter weather a couple weekends ago. It got pretty cold pretty fast. The temperatures dropped pretty fast, and then it was snowing and blowing and things like that. My horses are the same way. My horses are out 24/7, and they have a big run-in shed that they can access whenever they want. That keeps them out of the wind because it's blocked. It's blocked on 3 walls. 2 hay feeders full of nice, very beautiful, yummy hay. And same thing. I went down there in the evening to, just to give them their evening feed and check their waters and everything. And they were both standing outside in the snow. And same thing, it was starting to get kind of icy on their back, right, because of the moisture. And so I did put blankets on them that evening just because my old guy is 29 this month. Wow. And he's doing really well, but, I worry about him being able to keep himself warm because he has a hard time regulating his body temperature now. And my other horse she doesn't like the cold. She was only outside because my other horse was outside. She can't make decisions for herself, apparently. And so, but I took their blankets off during the day because the sun was out, and even though it was still cold, but it wasn't snowing. And so it is funny. I kind of was going to send you a picture, actually, of that because I thought you might be experiencing something similar.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
So, well, I know we're going to be chatting a little bit more about kind of the, shedding the old year last year and stepping in new. And Katie, I was curious, what are you looking forward to boldly stepping into this year?
Yes. So, for our listeners, if they haven't heard yet, this is the year of the horse in the Chinese zodiac. And not just any horse, the fire horse. And so, as you mentioned, Ginny, it carries a real energetic theme. And it follows that year of the snake, which was about shedding what's no longer useful, letting go of identities or habits or even roles that no longer fit who we are, where we're going. Mm-hmm. So it's been really interesting because as you listen to people, I know that 2025 was challenging for a lot of people. And we felt very lucky that we had a good year here. But there were things where I was hesitant to reach out about certain opportunities, finding clients that just really no longer fit. And so being able to have the courage and the ability to redefine some of those relationships and move into opportunities that were really better for them and for us is always, takes a lot of energy, but also opens up a lot of opportunity for new exciting things to come down the road as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm looking forward to today's conversation because I feel like it just marks a shift, right? It's not just a shift in the calendar, but how leaders are being called to move forward right now. So interestingly, when I realized that 2026 was going to be the year of the fire horse, which was last fall, I just out of curiosity, based on my 2025, I was like, I'm really ready for this year to be done. And so I went out and just looked to see and asked Google the question, what's the upcoming year in the Chinese zodiac? So this was before there started to be a lot of stuff out on social media about, this year of the fire horse. And so when Google came back and told me that, I said, oh, well, that sounds really good. I like that. So as I started exploring more about what the year of the fire horse meant, I also found out that I was born in the year of the fire horse the last time. So for our listeners, if you're not familiar with the Chinese zodiac, every year there's a different animal that represents the incoming year. And so the year of the horse comes around fairly frequently, but the year of the fire horse, and I'm going to age myself here, which is okay because I just have had a lot of life experience. The last year of the fire horse was 1966, which is the year I was born. So I told my husband, I think that explains a lot. A lot about me, a lot about how I show up in the world, a lot about how I function. So I decided that I was just going to embrace it and really just, hold on to that. So I'm just wondering a little, Katie, what is this about this snakes and horses thing? And what's the difference between last year as the year of the snake and this year as the year of the fire horse and how that might show up for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. As the conversation has started to show up in social media, those of our horse friends who don't necessarily always think about the leadership connection are talking about, what it's like to be around horses. And if it's the year of the horse, there's been a lot of jokes about, well, maybe we need to lunge the year first. And what does that mean? So in the horse world, if you have a young horse or a horse that's highly energetic, you get it to move around before you get on and ride it, so that it helps kind of blow off some of that extra steam or energy so that it's more manageable. And so when I think about that, that really plays into what we're looking at as leaders or business owners as we step into conversations about new opportunities. I know that I actually just had a very exciting conversation with an organization that I think we're going to partner and collaborate on some of the equine assisted coaching programs. And the energy was fabulous. It was like we'd known each other for years. We're ready to move forward. And then I got all done and I was exhausted. And I was like, maybe I needed to lunge this conversation a little bit before we got started. And so when I think about, that snake, that shedding, letting go of things that just really held us back and being ready to step into the movement and the momentum that's coming. But I also really think, and horses do that, right? Like they don't think about, oh, we're going to plan XYZ. When they're ready to run, they're ready to run. But when I also think about it, it's also moderating how we take care of ourselves afterwards.
Right.
To avoid that burnout piece and that pure exhaustion that can come from all of the positivity that the fire horse can bring.
Yes. And you were talking about, the different conversations on social media. And again, for those of us who have horses and have been around horses for a long time, a lot of counter memes have come out, right? Because at first it was a lot of this really inspirational things about the year of the fire horse. And I think, and those are valuable. And that's really kind of what we're going to talk about today is, those positive things of it. And also people who have been around horses a long time, also posting things about, well, I hope it doesn't look like this fire horse, and pictures of horses doing what horses do sometimes, which isn't always helpful. And so, or trudging around in the mud right after the horses and things like that. So there's pros and cons to all of that.
If I think about my horse Leroy, he kind of sums up perfectly what we're going to talk about today, because we were in a situation last year that was not the best situation for him. And when we pulled him out, he had a lot of issues to shed, shedding that snake skin. And you talk about energy. There were days where he could literally, buck like a bronc you would see at a rodeo. And we have him in a new training facility situation that is much more suited to him, to me. And he still likes to have a little bit of that goofballness in him. And so what we've talked about is, setting boundaries and allowing for this disciplined goofiness to come out. So giving him the space to be his quirky little self, but learn how to control that energy so that it doesn't bowl everyone over in the process.
Well, and that's so interesting because, I think if we're looking at this idea of the year of the fire horse, what you may be hearing if you are following this, and for our listeners, and if you're not following it and you start being curious about it, what you'll hear is a lot of things that the year of the fire horse is defined by freedom, moving forward, bold forward motion, being independence, vitality, adventure, all of those things you're going to hear about. And those are things that show up for horses in real life. Horses are all about freedom. They really prefer that. Katie and I talking about, they have freedom of choice to go inside their shelter or stay out in the snow, and they actually prefer to be out in the snow sometimes. And so those are the kind of things that we're thinking about, and also recognizing that you can't just be thinking about boldly going forward. You do have to also be prepared, which we've talked about in some of our other podcasts, about what happens when something gets in your way, right? How do you course correct, and how do you step back and reevaluate your goals that we talked about last month? All of those kind of things. And so I'm looking forward to us kind of diving into this conversation a little bit more, Katie, around leadership and what leaders are talking about. And I know for me, in my work with leaders, working with leaders globally, I'm hearing from them that they really did a lot of hard work in 2025 with having to adapt and become even more agile with AI really just escalating into everything within organizations, and having to start thinking about how do we reinvent more quickly, those kind of things. And so they've had the opportunity in 2025 to reflect on where are we at currently, what's happening in the environment in so many ways. I mean, we can't ignore the fact of what's happening geopolitically in the world. Tariffs are impacting all kinds of things for leaders and the decisions they're trying to make and strategize, and as well as just all the shifts that are happening everywhere. And now with AI again becoming such an integral part of everything, and how it's impacting all the different pieces of organizations, right? It's no longer just something that's over here on the side, it's now out in front. And so leaders are recognizing they have to recalibrate. But I do think that they are ready to move forward now, right? 2025, kind of a lot of like, wow, what's happening to me? Look, it's like a horse running around just wildly changing direction all the time, and not being able to stay focused on anything. And so that's kind of what it seems to me, that for leaders, maybe something is ready to emerge. And that's really what we're talking about, right? With looking at shedding what what was before and now stepping forward. And I've heard this described, sort of this space in between, right? A moment when you are shedding and letting go of something that is no longer working for you, but you're not quite ready to claim and step into what comes next. And I've heard this called a liminal or transition space. And it can be really uncomfortable because that's where there's not any certainty, right? You're sort of like, where do I go from here? So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that, Katie, and conversations you're having?
I hear there's some leaders as well, even though they're ready to step into something new, that uncertainty is challenging to deal with. This really shouldn't come as a surprise, right? One of the strongest psychological forces is our resistance to change as humans.
Right.
Psychologists have studied this for decades, and there are many reasons behind that. Change is hard. We also don't know what the change is going to look like when we get to the other end. There's also a fear of moving too fast. Change, we don't want to stall to the point where we're never moving forward, but when change happens so rapidly, especially when it's out of our control, like you mentioned, what's going on geopolitically and with tariffs and everything, it just adds to this question of what comes next.
Right.
But there's also one of the things that I found really interesting in a Psychology Today article that I was reading is that another reason change is so hard is because the people around us don't have faith in the change makers.
Yes.
The ones that are leading change. And there's a lot of reasons for that, that we'll get into and how the horses kind of bring that up in our sessions. But we have to remember that we might be excited about change and we might be ready for change as a leader, but we have to make sure that everyone around us is on board, and they all have very different aversion or acceptance of risk. They all want very different levels of communication and knowledge and information before,
Right.
Rushing in.
Right.
And so, that all plays into how ready we are to really let that old skin go and step into these new opportunities that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's so true. And, when we're thinking about it through that lens, there's a lot of different things out there within the leadership development space and conversations around how to ensure that people are ready for change. One of the things is, first, people have to have an awareness that there's a need for change. Now, I think that is much more prevalent now. I do think that people do understand, we're at whatever levels of an organization. It seems to me like I'm hearing fewer conversations about a resistance to being aware of the need for change. I'm hearing fewer conversations around, well, we've always done it that way, or I don't understand why we have to do this new thing. So I think that piece of it, people are starting to come in. Now, then you have to, though, make sure people need to have a desire to change. People can be aware that there needs to be change, but they may not have a desire to change, right? They may not really see the advantage for them personally to accept change and be part of it. And so, and people have trouble letting go of what was. And you were just talking about the uncertainty piece, and that is why we like to look to the past, right? Because the past is certain, because it's already happened. We know what's happened. And our brains literally are wired to resist change, because change is dangerous in our brain. Because our brain doesn't like to not know what to expect, right? Our brain likes to be able to take in information and know what's going to happen so that it can keep us safe. And so we are sort of battling this biological resistance to change. And it does take a lot to push through that. And sometimes that can really be exhausting for people. But along with the desire for change, even if people do have a desire to go along with the change, we need to make sure, do they have all the knowledge that they need in order to go into that change? And I think that's a big part of where leaders get into trouble, is they maybe make assumptions that people have the knowledge and skills that they need in order to adapt and move forward. And sometimes they don't. And so, I think that's an important part of the conversation. And I don't know. I mean, what are some of the things, Katie, that you maybe are hearing from leaders about this? Like, they know they want to have something different, but they're not sure what that is.
That's a great question. And a lot of the conversations that I've had actually are revolving around leaders who feel like they've outgrown their current role or strategy. So I know at this point we've spoken a lot about what that looks like to their teams, but it's also showing up within their professional capacities. And that's where I'm hearing a lot of conversations. And, it starts to hit around that age when we've accomplished a lot in our careers, maybe those 40s, 50s. We're not sure what the next step is going to be. And that's where, I work with a lot of coaches who do not do the equine work, but that's where a lot of coaches step in and they'll help guide them through, well, what does the next phase of life look like?
Yeah.
Especially when we've gotten to living the first half of our life, right? And we're now ready to live the second half. And what does that look like? Especially when we're not ready to retire. And so there's been a lot of conversation around how do I really dig in and understand where I am satisfaction wise with my role, and if I'm not, how do I then take that into the current organization, whether that becomes taking on a new type of workload or shifting to a new different department, or is it time to make a move outside of what you've known, which can be equally scary, especially in a time when the job market is so tough. Let's be honest.
Absolutely.
I know so many people that have been looking for jobs for months, some of them close to a year, and that can be scary to step out and do that at this time, as well. And if we look at our horses, they really are hardwired to not change either, right? They want to have that level of comfort, and for good reason. And so it really can take a lot of effort to help show ourselves or someone else that we're leading that there is a stronger way or easier way to do things that might take a little effort to learn, but once it's learned, becomes a much more ingrained way of doing things.
Yes, and I think it's important when we're talking about this fire horse energy and boldly moving forward and being adventurous and all of those things. I think it's important to recognize that fire horse energy isn't about chaos or impulsivity. Okay, I mean, I think that's the piece that horses aren't by nature chaotic or impulsive. It seems like that sometimes to humans, but generally, even if they are responding to a danger in their environment, something that causes them to feel unsafe, they are still measured in how they respond. Particularly the horses who are in the leadership roles. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't horses in the herd who respond with more energy than might be necessary, and they can create some chaos. But generally, any movement that horses make is very deliberate in some way, and they're always only using the amount of energy needed to respond to the current environment. And so the way I see fire horse energy is more about an authentic energy, and it might show up as maybe we start to have a reduced tolerance for performative or inauthentic leadership. That starts to happen a lot when you start getting into your 40s and 50s and you start going, I'm just not even going to tolerate that anymore. Or you at least are recognizing it and you're finding ways to not have to get sucked into it. I think that there can also be a stronger pull towards self-direction, right? What you were just talking about, what is it that I want now at this point in my life, in my career? And so we might have a heightened sensitivity to what feels slow or misaligned because we're paying closer attention to energy. And I think, at least for me, I see it as I have much more of an internal sense that movement is inevitable. It is going to happen because that's just how the universe is. we are constantly moving. We're moving forward every millisecond. Right? We're moving. The earth is moving. All of the things in the sky are moving. It's just movement is a natural thing. But like you were saying, Katie, I think people get so concerned about the uncertainty of not knowing what's next. And so thinking about this concept of how do I really embrace this fire horse energy where I don't have to feel like I'm being impulsive, that I can have some control over the forward movement, but I'm also going to choose to keep moving forward. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, it really takes me back to, I mean, we could see this in a lot of sessions where we work with leaders and the horses, right? But it takes me back to one session where we had a group working together and they were trying to collectively move 3 horses from one space to the next. And to your point, the horses aren't really looking for chaotic energy, but that's what was happening because they, as a team, had been doing a lot of culture work, but they weren't sure where to take that next step to really get to the next level of being a cohesive team, even though they had invested so much time and were on a good path. And so when they started, the horses were ping-ponging all over the place, to the point where, you know, as coaches and horse people, we have to like take a step back and let things happen, but to the point where we had to call for a moment for safety for everyone.
Right.
And when they came together and reconnected on, okay, what does this change look like for us? And how can we take small steps to get to the big change we're going to? All of a sudden, that chaotic energy turned into excited energy where everyone was united around the same cause. And all of a sudden, the 3 horses went from this big open space into the door and into the smaller space that we were working with without any challenges to the team. And so it was this lesson of, okay, energy is great, and we need to have energy to help us get through change, but how do we moderate that energy? And the horses really help show them how to bring that together within their teams. It was really quite interesting to watch.
Yes, that's so interesting because what you're describing, Katie, is what we see all the time, right? We're not working together, but this work that we do with the horses, these kind of things are what show up regardless of who the team is, who the horses are, where we are, all of those things. And I know that oftentimes, I think that leaders are internally ready to move in a direction. I mean, this is what I see with my clients is they want to move. They want to go where they need to go. They want to move the horses where they need to go. But they sometimes are hesitant to give themselves permission to act, to actually ask for that. And so they have all this conflicting energy happening and knowing that they want to step forward, but they're unsure because the outcome isn't certain or guaranteed. That is something I hear a lot is when I check in with clients because there's no movement happening, they will eventually say to me after they blame the horse for being lazy and not wanting to do stuff. Then finally they'll say, well, I'm not sure that the horse is actually going to do it. The horse is actually going to move where I want them to go. They want some certainty that what they are asking for is going to happen, or the result that they're looking for is going to happen. And so this is where I love being able to be in conversation with people about, well, if you don't at least start moving, I guarantee you that the result you want isn't going to happen. Mm-hmm. Right? And so then starts this dance of, well, how much energy do you need in order to start forward movement? And then how do you keep the momentum going? That to me is what I am curious to see what happens this year. You know, in our last episode when we were talking about setting goals and how oftentimes you have to be able to readjust based on changes in the current reality. And I'm wondering what things are going to look like in a few months. Just so people know, the year of the fire horse doesn't actually start until mid-February. So we actually are still, when we are recording this, it is still the year of the snake. But I will be curious to know what happens. People get real excited, right, at the beginning of the year, January, February. People are like, yeah, it's that whole thing. It's why gym memberships are only $1 a week for the first 3 months. And because they know this, they know that January and February is when people sign up for the gym because they set out, they have all these New Year's resolutions. So I'll be curious to see, because when I'm working with clients with the horses, that's the piece that even when they get sort of psyched up to start going, the horse starts moving, then they don't know what to do. They don't know how to keep their energy or regulate their energy to keep the horse moving at a pace that doesn't create chaos. And so I am very interested to watch what unfolds and what kinds of things start coming out on social media once the year of the fire horse actually gets in motion.
That maybe we'll have to have a recap at the end of the year of the fire
I
horse.
think so.
It makes me think of some strategies that we have learned ourselves or that we share with our clients that might help listeners as well as they transition or get ready to step into this year. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we talked about ahead of recording is to claim our freedom internally first. Right. And that really made me stop and think, because that's something that I even have been doing really in 2025 and will be doing more of in 2026. And it really starts with giving yourself permission. Yes. So for me, that has been giving myself permission to be authentic in the fact that horses are part of my life, and to start talking about that in client conversations as appropriate outside of the coaching, being vulnerable and getting up and giving presentations where to a room of people who may not yet be ready to come into the arena, but they're ready to learn something different about leadership from a different perspective and a different lens. I'll take it even so far as fancy dress-up events are not my favorite thing. They're very hard for me to go to. And I had one in January, and I have one after this recording. And leaning into dressing authentically to me, which means cowboy boots and an appropriate dress. There might only be one of in the closet. But, giving ourselves to permission to claim that freedom, to show up authentically, and see how that leads into new opportunities, because since doing that is so totally opened up opportunities that I didn't even think were going to come down the path.
Yes. So what question do you need to ask yourself and reflect on, Katie, when you're kind of in that thought process and exploring that internal freedom?
Yes, you're going to coach me here right on our podcast, aren't you? I think I'm not the only one. I think it comes down to the societal, pressures, right? Are we willing to overcome the head trash or the imposter syndrome that makes us unique, and really step into what we want to own? And, so I give myself this little pep talk. For me, I have some music that I put on repeat when I'm getting ready. So I know myself well enough to know what does my routine need to be to get in the space where I can go and do, which has been, like I said, a learning process that will continue to move into 2026.
Well, yes, I think those are all valuable things. And I think it's important to also remember, when we want things to get moving forward, we have to understand that forward movement comes from clarity and not pressure on ourselves and others. So, horses actually move pretty quickly when they're clear about where they want to go. And if they're not forced. What's interesting is the more that people put a lot of pressure on the horses to force them to do something, the more resistant they become, which stops forward movement. And so I think it's important, a couple of questions that our listeners can ask themselves if they're feeling like they're not moving forward is, what am I running toward and what am I running from? And because those are two very important questions to explore when you are looking to move boldly forward and to let go of things that no longer serve you, whether that is in your personal life or as a leader. And so really thinking about that and saying, well, what is it that I'm running toward, right? I'm running toward having a life that I want, or if in a leadership role, I'm running towards creating something that is going to an organization that can quickly adapt to the changes that are happening and not get stuck somewhere. But also looking at that, what is it that I'm running from? And that's where I think coaching is so valuable, is people can explore that. We get to do that with our clients of what is it that you don't want to have to address. And sometimes it's just simply, well, I really don't want to have to face the uncertainty, right? I want this thing, but I don't want the uncertainty. Well, you can't have both of those things. If you want something different, it means you have to step into uncertainty. So, yeah.
You know, you make an excellent point, because the year of the fire horse does favor these new ventures, this disruption, innovation. And sometimes when we know we need to make that bold move, we get stuck because we're hesitant. And a few of the questions that I like to ask are, you know, in addition to what am I running toward and from, what's bringing me energy? Where are the skills or the aspects in my work that really get me excited? And on the flip side, what are the things that really drain me? And it's perfect timing that we're talking about this, because I am part of a business accelerator, and these are the things we're talking about. Where can we strategically hire in the company to take the things that drain the energy so that I can work on the things that give the energy, that allow space for making those bold moves that are next. So being hesitant can stop us from getting in the direction we want to go, and it can also just drain our enthusiasm. So we really have to find ways to take steps and take action to bring that energy back and keep moving us forward.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of how horses utilize energy. You know, horses conserve their energy for what's meaningful to them, which is generally food and safety.
Yes.
And so ironically, I think we have a lot of similarities there with them. But I think this is the opportunity again for people to think about, where is your energy going right now? Where has it been in 2025? Where do you want it to be in 2026? You know, if something gives you energy, that matters. You need to pay attention to it. I know for me, I've done a lot of that work of what is it that gives me energy? I'm going to do more of that, because that's how I keep my cup full. If I'm constantly doing things that are draining my energy, then my cup is going to empty, and then I'm not going to be able to help anybody, or, you know, to do the work that I love. And so for leaders, I really encourage them to think about that and think about how, you know, horses use the energy that is needed for the current reality. So how can leaders do that as well as they are exploring moving forward this year?
There is an excellent book that I've had on my shelf for a year, and I literally started reading it before this recording, and it's called Buy Back Your Time. And in the first 2 chapters, this is all it talks about. So if you are a reader, I highly recommend taking some time to either listen to or read Buy Back Your Time, and it will help you realize or recognize areas, even if you do this work all the time, because Ginny and I spend a lot of time thinking about that, but it even takes it to the next level and helps you really dig in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Katie, what are some closing thoughts you have for our listeners?
Well, as we've talked about, the year of the fire horse is not about reckless speed, but it is about that freedom to take forward movement, moving because we're ready and not just because we're afraid. And horses show us that when freedom and confidence and clarity align, that forward motion becomes really powerful and sustainable over the long term.
Oh, so true. And I'm so grateful that I get to have the experience of being with my horses every day and paying attention to what is inspiring them to move at any given point in time. It's not always about food. I mean, but they are animals of forward motion, and they are almost always in motion of some kind. Very rarely do you see a horse walking backwards on its own unless it's just trying to, move away from something. So what I want to share as we close is, if 2025 helped you shed what no longer fit, right? Maybe you became aware of things in 2025 that weren't working for you, but it took a while to get rid of those. 2026 is really your invitation to move forward boldly, independently, and with intention. And that is so key. You want to do forward motion with intention. And so I hope that this episode has given you some cool things to think about in this year of the fire horse. And if you enjoyed the episode, please share it with someone. Maybe you know somebody else who is ready to make some bold movement forward, and so they might enjoy the episode. But as always, as you step into now this year of the fire horse, stay grounded, stay connected, and always lead with instinct.
This has been the Leading with Instinct podcast, focusing on intuitive leadership and fostering deep team connections through equine experiential leadership development and coaching. The Leading with Instinct podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Collaboration Partners, harnessing the collective human potential in organizations since 2009, providing equine experiential learning for lasting change. Get in touch at thecollaborationpartners.com and by katiethecoach.com, helping entrepreneurs and business leaders reset, reconnect, and reframe to live their best professional and personal lives. Visit katiethecoach.com for more information. For more information about equine experiential development and coaching and the Leading with Instinct podcast, visit www.leadingwithinstinct.com. The Leading with Instinct podcast is available at leadingwithinstinct.com, on the Leading with Instinct YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Subscribe today, and thank you for listening to the Leading with Instinct podcast.